signaling peptides that say, hey, make more collagen. They're encapsulated. That capsule is lined with carrier peptides, and those carrier peptides go directly to the fibroblast to release that signaling peptide. So you don't have the signaling peptide floating all around, not being able to do anything. It really, they go exactly where they need to go because they only have their key only matches with one lock.
Hello and welcome to Unpacking Beauty. This podcast is all about unpacking the science, marketing, and trends in the beauty industry. My name is Kelly Driscoll. I am a skincare enthusiast on YouTube, and I'm the creator and host of the show. I wanted to create Unpacking Beauty because through my years uploading to YouTube, creating reviews and breaking down ingredients lists and skincare textures and why products worked for me and why they didn't, I have a lot of questions that I just myself cannot answer. So I wanted to create a show where I can go to the experts with all my burning questions and yours as well. For the very first episode of Unpacking Beauty, I wanted to cover one of my favorite subjects in beauty, which is skincare ingredients, specifically peptides. Why do we love peptides in skincare so much? Because I absolutely love peptides in skincare. And it is actually one of the more confusing class of ingredients out there. Peptides don't do just one thing for the skin. There's so many different ones with a variety of benefits. Some peptides can stimulate collagen. Some can firm and lift the skin. Some can target hyperpigmentation on the skin. Some can even help strengthen your skin barrier. So it's a huge class of ingredient, and just there alone, there's lots of questions about what peptides can do for you in your skincare products. But how do you effectively formulate skincare products with peptides? What ingredients do and don't mix with peptides? So I wanted to take all of my questions to Alli Reed. She is the founder and formulator of Stratia Skincare. Started in 2016, Stratia is an obsessively researched skincare brand. All of the products start with an ingredient or a benefit, and then Alli starts her research from there, really finding out what are the most effective concentrations and combination of ingredients to achieve her end goal of creating a unique skincare product that actually works. Today, I'm bringing her all my questions about peptides, and we're also chatting about one of the recent Stratia releases, Interface, which is a peptide-based moisturizer. We are covering it all. What are peptides? What can they do for the skin? Are peptides safe for the skin? And which ingredients can you or can you not mix with peptides? So without further ado, let's welcome Alli Reed to Unpacking Beauty. Alli Reed, thank you so much for joining me on Unpacking Beauty. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, again, for being here. I'm super excited to dive into our conversation about skincare formulation and peptides. Before we jump in, I would love to just get an abbreviated version of how you started Stratia and how you first started getting into formulating skincare and starting the brand in 2016. Now, if listeners are interested, we did an in-depth episode a couple of years ago on my first podcast, The Journey, where we really did go into Alli's journey of creating Stratia and skincare formulation. So I will put that link in the show notes if anybody wants to dive a little bit deeper. But yeah, I would love to hear the really abbreviated version about how you got into this space and this industry.
Yeah, so I have never worked in the beauty industry before starting Stratia. I didn't even mean to really start a company as so much. But I was just a really passionate skincare consumer, and I got into skincare for the first time in my 20s, which meant, I hadn't really been immersed in it, so I was kind of coming to it as an outsider. And I'm a left brain person, I'm a science person, and so I was so fascinated with skincare for that really unique interaction between the chemistry of a skincare formula and the biology of a living organ. And that, what I find so fascinating about skincare in particular is that makeup, is art. It washes off at the end of the day, but skincare is science, and it can actually if you have a really thorough skincare routine, you can skip it for a couple days and your skin will still be reaping the benefits of what you had already done. So that spoke to my laziness of being able to take a day off here or there in a way you can't with makeup. But so I just got really, really deep into skin and skincare, reading dermatology journals, peer-reviewed studies, everything I could about how skincare is formulated, how the skin works, the interaction between the two. got to a point where I was really well educated on skin and skincare, but found that it wasn't helping me shop as a consumer. That the only information I was getting about a skincare formula was whatever kind of trickles through the marketing department. So I wasn't sure if these formulas, used the right ingredients at the right percentages with the right combinations of ingredients in the right vehicle formulas to actually get the effects that, were being studied. So I decided to just cut out the middleman. I took all this research I'd been doing, combined it with, I studied chemistry in college, so I, knew how to set up a little mobile lab in my kitchen and started formulating my own skincare for myself. Came up with a couple formulas that aligned with some really compelling research I'd read that didn't seem to be, I couldn't find anything like it reflected on the market. Decided to just launch on the side of my full-time job, made, 8 bottles for launch day, and then it took off from there.
That's amazing. And totally just comes from a place of passion and starting it for yourself, but then starting to share it with others. So it's been an incredible journey. I'm sure at some points it feels really long, like a long time ago, but at the same time, like such a, fast ride at the same time, the way that Stratia has picked up in popularity and in recognition. And as the product line has really expanded too, you recently launched a new product interface in 2022. I'm really curious to hear your process, like from start to finish, when you're thinking about creating a new product. Where does that start? What does that step-by-step process look like for you?
When I formulate, I tend to start with either a specific ingredient combo, or a specific skincare effect. So I have something in mind. So with interface, I knew I wanted to do something with peptides. And I kind of knew I wanted to do something with peptides for many years, but had a really hard time cracking it. Had a really hard time figuring out, because peptides it's such a massively broad class of ingredients. Like a peptide is technically any chain of amino acids between 2 and 50 amino acids long. So it's like, combining Legos. You can make infinite combinations. So the idea of what peptides do for skin took a ton of research. And then peptides are also really unstable. So making sure that I wasn't just putting them in the formula to, make it look good on an ingredients list, but make sure that it was actually going to do something, that those peptides were actually going to be active. They were going to reach the skin while they were still active. They were going to be able to penetrate to where they needed to go in order to do their effect. So that was it started with me just obsessively researching peptides, how they work, all the research, getting samples of every peptide on the market, testing them out. And then when I formulate, I have a list of about 1,000 people who have signed up to volunteer test prototypes. So I make a prototype, send it out, get feedback, iterate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it really just starts with me being curious about something specific and seeing, and there have also been times where I'm like, I want to create X type of product, and then I try, and I'm like, I can't get there. And so I have to abandon it. But yeah.
And the curiosity too with, starting off with I want a product that will do X or uses X ingredients. How does that work with, you have a core stable of products offered by the brand too? Do you have to think about, do you have to turn off your chemist brain a little bit and think with the marketing brain, how is this going to fit in with the other lineups? And how is this going to complement? How is this going to, work with the other products?
I never turn off my chemist brain, much to the chagrin of my marketing department. But when I formulate, I really do want to create a product that doesn't already exist, both in terms of our lineup, but also in terms of the market as a whole. If it already exists in a well-formulated and affordable way, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I'm never going to create a glycolic acid toner, because there are some really great affordable options for glycolic acid toners out there. I can't bring anything new to that. So it still is coming from a chemistry place of not wanting to reinvent the wheel, not wanting to do something that's already been done either by myself or by other brands. So I think that's part of the fun, is it's kind of a Tetris game of trying to fill in gaps. And so that's part of the chemistry fun for me.
Definitely. I can see that because I've used all the products. Spoiler alert, I've used them all. And I can say there's definitely a uniqueness about them. I definitely feel like they're doing something a little bit different. I do a lot of product comparisons on YouTube, and Stratia is one where it's like I don't usually find dupes or like super comparable, or like the ingredients are the same, but the effects are not, the performance is not. So I think that that's actually, I actually really just have to commend you, because like this space is so crowded, to be able to kind of like figure out what is a different take, or just something new is just increasingly, I think, becoming harder. But you're doing it, which, yeah, it's very impressive. So, going back to Interface, this is, your peptide based moisturizer. The current formulation uses seven different peptides, and it's a mix. As you said, like peptides are a huge, broad class of ingredients. They all do different things, but you have a mix of signaling and carrying peptides in the moisturizer. Can you you've already kind of given us the breakdown of like what peptides are, but can you tell us a little bit more about like what a carrier peptide is, what a signaling peptide is, what they're capable of doing for the skin, maybe in the context of the ones that you're using in Interface?
Yeah. So peptides, I think there's so many skincare ingredients that are derived from our own biology and that have evolved in such cool ways. So peptides are, as I mentioned, they're a short string of amino acids. There are 22 amino acids in the body. So if you can imagine 22 different colors of Legos, and then you stack them together in different ways, and you can make different peptides. But another way to think about peptides is that they are fragments of proteins. So if you take a short chain of amino acids, you get a peptide. If you take a super long chain of amino acids and like twist them in a specific way, then it becomes a protein. Protein, obviously, proteins are crucial for so many different biological processes. One of the ways that signaling peptides work, signaling peptides are essentially a peptide that plugs into a receptor on a cell to convey a message. So for example, one cool way that they've evolved is that if, say, you get a cut on your hand, you have a bunch of obviously proteins all throughout your skin. When you cut the hand, it breaks some of those proteins just from the sheer, the cutting of it. Mm-hmm. And breaks it into component peptides, which then become signaling peptides for your immune and inflammatory response to say like, hey, something bad just happened. Send healing cells, send, clotting because something bad just happened. So that's an example of signaling peptides as kind of the messengers to tell other parts of your body what they need to do, how they need to react. So that's one example. And then you mentioned carrier peptides, which are another type of peptide we use. Carrier peptides are like the taxis of the body. So a signaling peptide would, for example, be floating around and then, find this sort of like the, receptor. A carrier peptide actually is essentially, you can kind of think of it like a key where a specific cell is a lock. So for example, the carrier peptides we use in Interface are specifically have receptors on fibroblasts, which are the cell structure in the dermis that generates collagen. So for our signaling peptides that say, hey, make more collagen, they're encapsulated. That capsule is lined with carrier peptides, and those carrier peptides go directly to the fibroblast to release that signaling peptide. So you don't have the signaling peptide floating all around, not being able to do anything. It really, they go exactly where they need to go because they only have, their key only matches with one lock.
Wow. Yeah, that's so fascinating, because it is, when you start to look into especially collagen stimulation, you start to learn that like, it's not just about putting collagen on your skin. That doesn't work at all, really. It's about like stimulating that body's process. But it is also interesting to learn even further, like you have to be even more specific if you want really good results. You really got to get down to the source. You can't just, willy-nilly like signal, hey, make more collagen. Like where? How?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to think about actually how kind of complicated the process can be, but how we can use ingredients combined together to complement each other to really start to get those benefits. And that's where that whole obsessively researched I think passion comes into play in the formulation. Now, I think, we just had a couple of tough years with the supply chain that has affected every single industry, including skincare and beauty. You did run into some issues with the manufacture of the peptides that you were using in the first iteration of Interface. You had to get back into the lab and kind of rethink, how can we keep this product on the shelves for people who love it, but address this, supply chain issue. So nothing has really changed with the quality and the texture of the product itself, but the peptide mix has. And you've added in growth factors into the peptide mix. Can you talk a little bit about growth factors? Because I know this is an area that is really exciting, but it's also an area that there is some concern about, safety and what are they doing for the skin, because peptides can signal things to the body and to the skin. So I'd love to hear, your take and your research on growth factors, why they were the perfect complement, almost an upgrade to the second version of your product, and why you love them.
Absolutely. So Stratia, we make everything in-house, which means we have so much flexibility in terms of manufacturing. We managed to get through almost all of the pandemic without any supply chain interruptions, and then this proprietary peptide blend was discontinued. So, as you mentioned, took it as an opportunity rather than an obstacle, and was able to find some really cool peptides to replace it with. So there were 3 peptides from our original 5 that were discontinued. Replace those 3 with 5 growth factors. So a growth factor is a specific type of peptide that signals cells to grow, it sort of modulates their reproduction. So we've got, for example, an epidermal growth factor, which triggers specific, the sort of dead skin cells in your epidermis that form your moisture barrier. So sort of signals them to get stronger, to strengthen that moisture barrier. We've got growth factors that signal increased sort of capillary growth in the dermis to make sure that your skin is getting the nutrients it needs. So it really is kind of regulating a lot of that cell turnover, a lot of that cell growth to make sure that your skin is as strong and healthy as possible.
So with growth factors' ability to signal to our skin to create more skin cells, basically, there is some people wonder if that is safe. I'm curious to hear your take on the safety of growth factors. I mean, I believe they're very well studied. But I know that is a question that some people who are just starting to get into peptide skincare can have, especially about, epidermal growth factor, I think, is the biggest one that gets a lot of attention, I think, with this question.
Yeah, and I think this is a complex answer where the answer is growth factors are totally safe to use on your skin. But I think this is also a good example of understanding how incredibly complex our biology is and how complex those biological processes are. So I think where people get stuck is that there is a link between, and you have to promise when I say this sentence that you will stick with me until the end of what I'm going to explain. There is a link between growth factors in the body, an increased presence of growth factors, and tumor growth, because tumors cancer is just sort of uncontrolled cell mitosis, cell division, that they are not, our cells, as they divide, as they undergo mitosis, they have sort of this pre-programmed death to make sure that they are not growing out of control. And when that pre-programmed death function goes awry, that's when a tumor grows, and that's why they sort of grow uncontrolled, and that's why they wreak such havoc on the body. So cancerous tumors produce their own growth factors to drive their own growth. But similar to what you said earlier, what we were talking about in terms of collagen production, if you put collagen on your skin, it's not penetrating to the dermis. It's not, even if you injected collagen into your dermis, it wouldn't structure itself in the same way. That the collagen in your dermis, what you need is to trigger those fibroblasts to create more collagen in the exact structure that your skin needs, that it's used for. So putting growth factors on your skin is not going to trigger cancer growth because that's not the pathway it uses. That's the reverse, that it's the cancer tumors that create their own growth factors to regulate or to upregulate their own growth. And that, like, the pathway to create a cancerous tumor is that, a proto-oncogene is triggered through damage to become an oncogene, which then becomes, kind of a cancerous growth. And a growth factor plays no role in that process. So that's a complex way of saying it, but essentially that growth factors don't trigger cancer. You see higher levels of growth factors in the body for someone with cancerous tumors because those cancerous tumors are producing growth factors, not because the growth factors have in any way played a role in the development of cancerous tumors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it actually, like, thank you for like kind of getting into the weeds of that, because that's exactly what it is, I think, with skincare ingredients, that if there is any little data point that might suggest, maybe like some safety questions, I think it's really easy for, not chemists to latch onto that information because it makes sense. It's easy to understand. And so oftentimes, the answer is more complex. It is more nuanced. It's not just like, well, because we found the EGF in the tumor, that is, therefore, if you put EGF on your skin, it's going to happen. I think that actually reminds me of a conversation that I had with Michelle Wong, who is a cosmetic chemist, a PhD, and she always, talks about it's so easy to latch on to those little data points or maybe even misinformation because they're often easier to understand than the actual complexity, like I said, getting into the weeds. So I appreciate that you were able to do that because once you hear that, once you're able to not just, grab onto a headline or just one data point and just kind of put all the pieces together, it makes a lot more sense why, these are ingredients that are absolutely safe to be used in skincare. Their function, it's not to create the growth, the tumor growth. You basically have to have the cancer already, right? So that's how you get the growth factor. So it's not the reverse way, which seems like it makes sense, but it doesn't.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be the case for any skincare ingredient you're using that is bioidentical, that's found in the body, because the body the body doesn't have unitaskers. The body doesn't have compounds that only work in one specific thing. The body is so unbelievably complex and perfectly engineered through evolution that growth factors they're not just used in tumors. They're used for a lot of beneficial biological processes to regulate the growth of all your cells.
Right.
That's just another way that it shows up in the body. So even, fatty acids are a huge part of the integrity of your skin barrier, but there are also plenty of negative biological processes that fatty acids show up in. So it's not like, you need to cut out this entire ingredient sector just because it's used in this one negative biological process, because the body is so incredibly complex that there's not anything really that your body uses and your body creates that is not being used in a number of different things.
Right. And the regulations around skincare ingredients, the amounts that are allowed to be used. I mean, this is a very heavily regulated industry as well. I think, we're kind of going slightly off a topic, but I think that it makes a lot of sense too, because we see in like the sunscreen world, we're seeing a lot of benzene being found in sunscreen, but also in after sun products. Now they're finding it in dry shampoos, I think now. So it's not just a sunscreen thing. And people can see that and kind of like get scared about like what's in their beauty products. But the fact that they're being found, that they're being caught, that they're being pulled off the market, while that seems scary, it actually is the system like functioning as intended. It's working exactly the way it's supposed to. Things are being tested, they're being caught, the regulations and all of that, and then those products are getting pulled. So I personally take a lot of comfort in knowing that there is a lot of regulation around it, and that we're kind of constantly learning about the ingredients and formulation and all of that. So like I said, it sometimes it's easier to be afraid about what was found, but I think it's also like, hey, the system is working, and I think that that's always a reason to, um, I don't know, to like to bring a little bit more like trust, and comfort back into using your
Hmm.
beauty products. So I,
And for example, those products where benzene was found, they were recalled out of both an abundance of caution and uh, a, as a PR move, because the levels that they were found, I think across the board, was so far below anything that could cause real damage to your body. So they're still safe to use. You don't need to worry if you use those products. Um, but that, that not only, as you said, is it that they're being tested and regulated and recalled, but that they are being recalled for such largely harmless concentrations of those ingredients.
yeah, my understanding is the amount of benzene that they were finding was equivalent to like what we're inhaling in city air, or like pretty
Exactly.
close. So it's the exposure that we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of already getting, as it is, which is not great, but it's already present. We're always a little bit exposed to it. And yeah, I think you made a good point that it really was an abundance of caution and a little bit PR move to make
Mm-hmm.
everybody look good. But the system is working. I would love to pick your brain. Peptides is the question of the episode. And one of the biggest questions that like I am like unable to answer as a skincare enthusiast when my community on YouTube asks me about, peptide skincare. What products or what ingredients can or cannot be combined with peptides? I think that this is a question that has been swirling around in the last couple of years with enthusiasts and industry experts alike. I think especially the biggest question surrounds copper peptides, which I believe that Interface uses a copper peptide. That's the one that I hear a lot of people saying, well, you can't use it with like tretinoin or retinoids. I've heard that you can't use it with exfoliating like AHA products. I hear it's the pH. I hear it's oxidization. I hear it's irritating. So I would love to pick your brain and your knowledge of peptides and all of your research. Is there really like some skincare products or ingredients that we should not be combining with our peptide products?
I'm going to have a really unsatisfying answer to this, which is, well, we do have copper peptides in Interface. They are encapsulated, which means that they are protected from interaction with other ingredients. That is just being released into your skin once it's already penetrated, so that I did not have to really dive deep into what it would and wouldn't interact with. And that's a priority for me when I formulate, is I don't want to have to give you a 10-page manual of how to use your skincare products.
Right.
So things like copper peptides, things like retinol, I choose the encapsulated versions because that means it's staying stable, it's not interacting with other ingredients. I don't want your skincare to feel like you are navigating a minefield. Um, I think in general, there are very few ingredients you cannot use with other ingredients.
Yeah.
Very few. So in general, if it feels bad, the only thing I would say sort of across the board is combining potentially irritating ingredients like AHAs, like retinoids, like benzoyl peroxide. Using multiple in one routine can over exfoliate or irritate your skin. So I tend to try to keep it to one potentially irritating active per routine. Beyond that, there are I think some ingredient interactions that you want to stay away from, but for the most part, I think it's really overblown, and it kind of gets clickbaity of like, never use these ingredients together, and if you have, you're burning your skin off. Like, that's not the case.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the whole like it's easy to latch on to things that make sense. It's like, oh yeah, these two just don't go together, and that's something that's easy for me to remember. But then when you're talking about like, well, the peptides are encapsulated, the retinol's encapsulated, so they're not actually really like interacting with each other at the top surface of your skin. They're actually going deeper into the skin and doing their own thing, going off in their own corner in your skin. And that's a little bit harder, to just kind of like wrap your head around, right? Especially if you're not like science minded. You're like, what do you mean? I just put everything on my face. How is that not interacting? But I think also it is, like, how do we know if it's encapsulated if you're not telling me? Because I think it goes back to that age old, like, the ingredients list can only tell us so much. And actually, once you really start like getting into skincare ingredients, you realize the ingredients list is telling you nothing, or it feels like it sometimes.
Exactly why I started formulating my own skincare products, because I can know that it's encapsulated.
Yeah. And like, unless you're going to tell me, and unless I'm going to read the paragraph,
Mhm.
I may not know that. And so I think that that's where it's like, it's easier to go like, oh, just don't ever use these two together. That's easier to remember than, well, if it's encapsulated and if it's this and if it's that. It's like, yeah, I think it does. It might, for some people, take some of the joy, I think, out of skincare. And I'm just such a firm believer that skincare should be enjoyable above all else. And whatever your entry point, with skincare, what you enjoy, it's different for everybody. So I think, yeah, it's probably unsatisfying for some listeners, but at the same time, I take a lot of comfort in that, because it takes out a lot of that question of like, what can I or can't I do? And really just like refocuses, like, how does it feel for me? How does it feel for my skin? Is my skin surviving using, retinoids and AHA and benzoyl peroxide? Is it feeling a little, itchy and irritated? Am I actually achieving what I want to? Like, am I actually seeing the results on my skin by using all of these things? I think that it can recenter the attention back to our own skin tuition. And again, yeah, what's the joy for us in skincare? What's our goals and what are we trying to achieve, rather than taking in a lot of information that I think ends up feeling really stressful and confusing. So I guess it sounds like if you're using peptides in your skincare routine, probably you don't have to worry about it too much if you're using other cell communicating ingredients or actives, or we don't really have to worry about pH at all. That's
Right. I completely agree with your analysis. I think that sunscreen is the only ingredient or the only product that if you don't use it, it'll kill you, or could kill you. And beyond that, skincare is not that serious. It's fun. It's self care. If you're not enjoying it, don't do it. And I think beyond that, getting back to how complex our skin is, it is also as unique as your fingerprint. So there's no way to predict exactly how your skin will respond. There are people who see no real benefits from tretinoin, which is one of the best studied, most sort of universally acclaimed skincare ingredients. So there's really, I think, the sort of didactic, you must use these products in this order, doesn't respect how complex the skin is, how unique the skin is. And the only way to know if a product is going to work for you is to use it and see if it works. Does it feel good? Is it accomplishing what you want? Is it, even if like, I love this ingredient, it works so well for my skin, but I have to wait 20 minutes before I use it, and then I can't use this other product after, like, I'm not going to enjoy that process, so I'll skip it. Like, it's not that serious.
Wow, mic drop. Skincare is not that serious. I actually totally love that. I think that's a really great way to like wrap it up, land this plane, like enjoy your skincare. And if you're not enjoying parts of it, like be brave and feel free to shake it up so that it is something that you do enjoy. Because like you said, at the end of the day, it is self-care. It should be fun. It should not be stressful. And we should empower ourselves to take back the joy and the ease in skincare. Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I feel like I just got a little bit smarter picking your brain. And I'm sure listeners really, really did enjoy hearing all your knowledge, because we all really love peptides. We want to know more about them. And if you are listening or watching right now and you want to connect with Alli and learn more about her products, where can we find you on the glorious internet?
Find Stratia anywhere on social media. Our handle's always at Stratia Skin, Stratia. I also keep my inbox open to anyone who has a product question, wants to suggest something for me to formulate. It's Alli, Alli, at stratiaskin.com. All of our products are available at stratiaskin.com, and I get on Instagram and TikTok a lot to talk through some of the science of skincare, some of the cool stuff that I love sharing about. So feel free to follow us there if you like this kind of stuff.
Excellent. And I will put all the links in the show notes and the video description box for really easy browsing for everyone. And again, Alli, thank you so much for your time. This was an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I hope you loved that conversation with Alli Reed from Stratia Skincare and the very first episode of Unpacking Beauty. If you're loving what you're hearing so far and you're excited for the upcoming episodes, I would be so honored if you take a moment to rate and review the show. You can rate it with stars on Spotify, and under Q&A, you can let me know all your thoughts about this episode. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can also rate it with stars. If you have a couple more minutes, I'd love it if you could just write a few sentences about how you're enjoying the show so far. Especially for a brand new show like this, those reviews really, really help support the show and help other listeners find it. Please share this with anyone who you think will enjoy this conversation anywhere on social media. And hey, if you're watching on YouTube, let me know what questions you want me to answer on the upcoming episodes of Unpacking Beauty in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening. I can't wait for you to hear the very next episode coming out in 2 weeks, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.